Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 6 of Using the Power Platform to Extend Finance and Operations app series. Today's topic is Power Apps, Model-Driven Apps. My name is Laura, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. By participating in this session using Microsoft Teams, your name, email address, phone number, and/or title may be viewable by other session participants. If you do not consent to be part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. The recording will be available on the TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenter or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our team will be responding to your questions throughout and at the end of the event. Closed captions are available in Spanish, French, German, Italian, Chinese, and Russian. To turn on closed captioning, click the closed caption button located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. To change languages, click the gear icon and make your choice. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Rachel Profitt, Senior Program Manager. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Like Laura said, we're really going to be diving into the Power Apps, Model-Driven Apps side of things today. Again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Profitt. My contact information is here on the screen. I do encourage you to follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn, or check out my blog at dynamics365lady.com. In today's session, we have 4 key objectives that we're going to be talking about. The first one is to really describe use cases for model-driven apps that you can use with your finance and operations apps. We also want to make sure that you walk away from this session and kind of understand the basics of creating new model-driven apps. I'm also going to be demonstrating an example of a model-driven app that is embedded into finance and operations. And then we'll wrap up with do's and don'ts for using model-driven apps and finance and operation apps. So some things that we aren't going to cover in today's session are detailed licensing aspects. We also are not going to be talking about Canvas apps or Power Apps portals. If you are interested in the Canvas apps, that was part 5. You can find that recording out on the Tech Talks page. And the Power Apps portals is going to be our next session in the series. So I invite you to join us for that. Some other things that we are not going to be covering in today's session are the details around dual write, data integrator, or virtual entities. You will be seeing some demonstrations around that, and they're included in some of my examples. So you'll see a few bits around that, but if you want more information about dual write, data integrator, or virtual entities, we do have other Tech Talks that have been done in the past that you can find on our Tech Talks page for more information. So the kind of breakdown of how we're going to flow through this today is starting out with those use cases. Then I'm going to show you how to create your own model-driven apps. And then I'm going to do a demo, more of like an end-to-end scenario, showing you how to build a model-driven app with both a native entity and using dual write and a virtual entity. Then we're going to kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about how you can put those apps into finance and operations. We'll talk about the do's and don'ts and wrap up with some checklists and resources to help you on your journey with model-driven apps. So to get started with our model-driven apps. Here we've kind of put together a few examples of apps that you might build for your specific industry. Obviously, this is not by any means a comprehensive list. They're just some ideas that you might be able to build. Some of these have functionality that are available in either customer engagement apps that you might extend. Some of them are available as sample apps that are provided with our industry accelerators. So if, and not all of them, but if some of these ideas excite you, hopefully at the end of this session, you'll be able to build your own model-driven apps or check out some of the existing apps that are available out in the Power Apps portal. So One thing to note about a model-driven app is that typically a model-driven app would be used as a standalone app. But keep in mind that you can also embed a model-driven app into your finance and operations using the personalization toolbar. You could also extend finance and operations to add buttons or custom forms that include a model-driven app, like in a wireframe, basically. So taking a closer look at these examples, on the first example, we've got a couple of retail scenarios. So the first one is like a business to business or custom orders app. Dynamics 365 sales has some functionality out there that is designed for your sales staff. You could start from those or even build your own sales app that's specific to your business and your products that you're selling to make that process easy for your sales reps. Another example would be a sales rep quality inspection application that allows your sales reps to, go out, use their tablets, in the retail stores and do quality inspections. Another example would be a self-service app or a kiosk type app that you could use in your stores to allow your customers to maybe do price lookups or order products that aren't available in your store, or even maybe find out where a product is located in your store, get additional information about your products. A couple of service industry examples are the first one is like a project contract app. So when we think about project contracts, we do have functionality in project operations or the older project service automation where you can create project contracts. But oftentimes, depending on the type of contracts or industry that you're servicing, there might be special needs or information that you need to track and document as a part of that pre-project sales engagement. So you could build out a project contract app. Another example is like a site inspection app. So for people to use out on a construction site or out on a service site where you can perform inspections and track information. There's some similar functionality that you might find in field service, for example. Or a customer prototyping app. So maybe you do a lot of custom work for your customers and you want to prototype and track some details around that. You could use a model-driven app to kind of define out all those data points that you need to capture. And then the last kind of industry that I focused in on and came up with a few examples was around manufacturing. So one example here is a shop floor monitoring app. You could, plug in your IoT devices and kind of keep track of what's going on your shop floor. You could use a scheduling app. There are actually quite a few examples of great scheduling functionality with both field service and project operations or the older project service automation that you could use as starting points or examples of what you might be able to build. Or a quality assurance app that allows your quality team to kind of keep track of those test results and things like that out on the shop floor. So just a few examples. We'll be looking at some of these. I'll actually be using the Manufacturing Industry Accelerator in a couple of my examples that I will be demonstrating later on today. So a couple more samples that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and all of the things that you see here, we've taken screenshots. Some of them are from industry accelerators. Some of them are just base customer engagement screens. And then the last example is where we've embedded a screen from customer engagement into finance and operations. So taking a look at the first one, this is a vendor onboarding application. It's actually a supplier management model-driven app. It's actually the out-of-the-box model-driven app that comes with the Manufacturing Industry Accelerator. Now, this accelerator is built directly on the Common Data Service, and out of the box, that Accelerator doesn't have any integration with finance and operations, but there's a lot of functionality that you could build synergies on and integrate your data with finance and operations. So this app is used by buyers to enter details about vendors and approve requests that vendors put in through a Power Apps portal. We'll actually be talking more about that portion of it in our next session. The second example here is a new product. In customer engagement, we have the ability to, create and maintain products. You could extend that and add additional fields. And those fields and that information could be embedded right back into finance and operations, or you could build something that's specific outside of finance and operations for your engineers, for example, to be able to enter details about products, bill of materials, keep track of engineering drawings, versions, and so on, along with maybe customer requests for custom type, products that you might build. The third example here is contract management. And so this is actually again, it's a standard screen that's available in customer engagement where you can set up project contracts. And the idea here is that project managers can track those contract details through the system until they become a project. And you might extend or enhance that functionality to make it easier for the various people in your organization to contribute to that project contract or view and approve those project contracts. And the last example here is an example where we've taken out-of-the-box customer engagement screens and embedded them directly into finance and operations. So this example that you see here, we'll talk about it a little bit more later on. This is like one of the asset screens from customer engagement that has been embedded directly into one of the asset management screens inside of finance and operations. So these are just a few ways that you can start to use your model-driven apps. One thing that's important to note when you're using model-driven apps with your finance and operations is that, again, you've got a couple different ways that you can get your data. You can get your data through dual write. You can get your data through virtual entities, or you could get your data back and forth between finance and operations by using Power Automate flows or a logic app, for example. So what I want to do is switch gears a little bit and talk about how we can get started building your first model-driven app. If you've never built one before, the basic process, I've kind of broken it down into 7 steps here, and each of these steps is a hyperlink with additional information and step-by-steps. I'm going to be actually showing each of these, not all of them, but some of these steps I'll be demonstrating to help you get started. Step 1 is to create an app. I actually personally like to create my app as a later step, like between step 5 and 6. But it's really just a personal preference. I think there's a little bit less back and forth if you do it that way, but it's obviously up to you. Once you create an app, you're going to want to start creating and designing your forms. The forms are the detail pages that you use if you're familiar with any of the customer engagement apps. These are the pages in the system where you create or edit records. Views are another key component. These are the list pages. So if you think about like finance and operations, most of our pages start with a list. And we have the concept of saved views where we can kind of put queries. Views in customer engagement or in the common data service are very similar. So you start from a list, you select the record that you want, and that takes you into that detail page, which is called a form in the common data service. We also have the ability to create system charts. And so this is actually one of the great benefits to using a model-driven app. If you wanted to make charts inside of finance and operations that maybe you were going to put in a workspace, there's 2 ways you can do that with finance and operations, either by doing custom development and using a SSRS report, or you could embed a Power BI report. The nice thing about this is that you can kind of use your F&O data along with your CE data or any other data that you bring into your common data service and very quickly and easily create these charts. I won't be demonstrating this today, so if you want to learn more about how to create these types of charts and embed them back into a dashboard or into F&O, I encourage you to take a look at the link. We also have the ability to create dashboards, much like we have the concept of workspaces and the ability to create dashboards in finance and operations. There's a similar concept in the model-driven app functionality. So I won't be walking through that today either, but again, if you want some more information, you can definitely take a look at that. Another key component of your model-driven app is security. So this is another key difference between a Canvas app and a model-driven app. So with a Canvas app, you have to share your app, and you don't really create like security roles for specific users to indicate which pages or buttons or actions a user is allowed to take. But with a model-driven app, we do have a role-based security model. It's the same security model that's used with customer engagement. So if you're familiar with it, it's the same thing. We just have the ability to create our own model-driven apps. And then business logic. So, 1 through 6 on this page are really what I would call your no code, low code type scenarios where you don't need a lot of technical experience to be successful at doing this. Some of the business logic things that you can do, like workflows and dialogues, can be done in a no code, low code fashion, but you also have the ability to create business logic by writing JavaScript and doing much more advanced development as well with your model driven apps. So these 7 links are a great starting point for you to learn how to create apps. Like I said, I'll be showing a portion of these steps today. There's also 2 learning paths that I've put links to over on the right-hand side, along with a certification. So if you're interested in getting certified in creating apps, I do strongly recommend the Microsoft Certified Power Platform App Maker Associate certification. So, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I want to kind of dive into it a little bit more. And before I start making that first app, or before you start making your first app, one of the things you're going to need to decide is, where is your data coming from? What are your data points? So before you start designing forms and charts and dashboards, you'll want to think about the data. If you're going to be using your finance and operations data, again, we have 4 basic options. One is dual write, which is that synchronous bidirectional integration of your data between F&O and the CDS. We talked about this in a little bit in part 1 and a deeper dive in part 2 of our series. And there's also a TechTalk that is specific to dual write that really deeps dive into that topic. The data integrator is another option, which is asynchronous, and it's one directional. So you can choose if that data is going to be sourced in the common data service and pushed into finance and operations, or vice versa. Virtual entities is the new player to the game, and this actually gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do. With those virtual entities, 99% of your finance and operations data can be surfaced into the common data service. And then we do have the support to do those CRUD operations, so create, read, update, and delete. On top of those virtual entities. I'll be showing an example a little bit later on where I actually enable some virtual entities and build some forms and put them in a model-driven app for you. And the last option is to use Power Automate. So in addition to using your finance and operations data, which we have a native connector for, there are 400 plus connectors available, and that number gets bigger every week, every month, that are available with Power Automate that allow you to connect to all sorts of other data sources. So if you need to kind of get data from multiple different places to be able to display that in finance and operations, this is a great option to use one of these 400 plus connectors to connect to whatever that data is. And if you do need data to go back into finance and operations because you have business logic in F&O, you can make a connection to F&O directly. So getting started, I start by showing you here how to create native entities. So you'll do this from the Power Apps Maker portal, and then you'll click on data and then entities from the left-hand side, and then click on new entity. You'll give your entity a name. And there are a bunch of additional settings that I don't go through in this demo that you can learn more about in those previous links. And after you click done, you can start adding fields. So I add a couple of different fields here, a couple of different types. So this first one is a date field. So you can see I click on that data type drop-down box and choose the type of field. And click done. And then I kind of repeat that process by clicking that add field. You'll notice when you click on that data type, there's a lot of different types of fields. It doesn't require you to be technical. You just need to select what type of data you want to have in a particular field, and the system will handle the kind of basic business logic for you without you needing to write any code. So I added a few fields here. I did a date. I did some text. I think now I do an image in this next example. So I click that drop down box and you can scroll down and you can see I choose image. So now I can add images into my records. Once you're done adding fields, you click Save Entity. And just like that, you have a new entity or a new table in your system where you can start storing that data. Once you've got data, then we can start building forms. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about how we can enable virtual entities. So native entities are great if it's new data, it doesn't exist in F&O. If you want to take data from your F&O environment, then what we do is, again, we'll open Power Apps, and this is a GIF. It'll play through about 3 times here. So you'll get to see it multiple times. You're going to open Power Apps and go to the settings, which is the gear icon in the upper right-hand corner, and then click on Advanced Settings. So here you can see that's where this is happening. And then you'll click on that funnel icon, the Advanced Filter icon, and use the drop-down box to search for the available finance and operations entities from the list. I do strongly recommend when you're searching that you add a filter for like a word. So in my example, I'm searching for contains. And I type in the word vend, so I'm looking for any of the entities that contain the word vend in it. Once you find the entity that you want to enable, you'll click on that entity, which will open up a new page. And once that new page opens up, there is a checkbox there called visible. Once you mark that visible checkbox, you'll want to save your record and close the windows. And then it might take up to 15 minutes. There is some caching that happens behind the scenes. Sometimes it might be really fast. Sometimes it might take up to 15 minutes. But once you've enabled that virtual entity, then you can start using that entity. And I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. The next thing I want to show you is how to enable a virtual entity for human resources. So this is a little bit different. With human resources, you'll actually log into the human resources user interface and navigate into the common data service configuration page. This is the standard page that we use in human resources to configure the legacy common data service integration, which has kind of always been there. But there's a new tab on that page called Virtual Entities, and that's where you can see the list of all of your entities. Then you'll search for an entity that you want to enable. In my example, I'm finding a benefits related entity. Mark the checkbox, and then if you scroll down on the page, there's a button here called Generate Refresh. Once you click that Generate Refresh, again, it might take a few minutes, but if you refresh that page, once it's been enabled, the status column, which is the far left column in this grid, instead of saying available, it will say generated. So that's how you know it's been generated. So slightly different process for enabling it through HR than you do with F&O. Now, I've kind of shown you 3 ways that we can get entities, right? So we have virtual entities and we have native entities. Native entities are used when the table and fields that I need don't exist in finance and operations, or maybe they do, and I'm going to use dual write and add additional business logic into my customer engagement application. So Once you've created your entity, the next step is to start creating and editing your views. Now, when you first create a new entity, the system will automatically create views for you. It creates 3 of them. It will put a few fields into it. It's usually like the primary key of your form and like the created by and the owner field. And you'll want to go in and update that. So you'll want to pick the fields that you want to use. So you go into data, entities, search for that entity that you want to use, click on it. And once you open it up, you can click the Views tab, pick the view that you want to edit. If you want to make a brand new view, you can click the New View button. And then it's just a drag and drop experience to add fields, resize fields, move fields around. There's also a properties pane over on the right-hand side where you can add sorting or filtering to your views. And when you're finished, you just need to save your view and publish it. After you're done publishing it, you use the back button, which will take you back to the entity, and you could start to make a new view. So after you have views, the next step in the process is to create forms. So again, in the Power Apps Maker portal, you're going to go into data and then entities, search for the entity that you want and click on forms. Again, the system will create 3 forms for you by default. And typically that main form is it is the main form that will be used, but there's also cards and quick views. The main form is usually the big form. It's the main version of the form that has all of the fields that a user might need to work with. And you can kind of decide, what you want things to be called. You can change labels, you can hide fields, you can change the formatting, and so on. So very quick and easy to create these drag and drop user interface. You don't need to be very technical to be able to build these. Now, once you've created your forms and updated all those different versions, the next step in the process is to actually create your model-driven app. And part of this process is to make your sitemap. So when you create a new app, you're going to be asked to give it a name. You can also go choose an icon that you want to use, and there's some additional settings. And then you click Done, and it will create this app for you. Then you're going to click on the sitemap, and you'll notice that it creates a new area, a group, and a sub area, and you'll want to give those appropriate labels. And there's a bunch of additional properties on the right-hand side that you can fill in. So in my case, I'm creating a new area called vendors, and then I add a sub area. And a sub area is the actual links that you will click on in the navigation pane on the left-hand side of a model-driven app. So I give it a name. You'll notice there's a bunch of additional properties. And if I want to add another sub area, I just need to make sure that I have the proper group highlighted. And I kind of repeat this process. I do it about 3 times, I think, in this demo. So I choose my all vendors page, which was already existing. Then I choose the vendor certifications page, which is the one that you saw me create in the previous 3 demos. And then I kind of repeat this a 3rd time and add a 3rd sub area, again choosing entity. And then you'll click the drop-down box, choose the entity that you want. I'm choosing vendor capabilities. Give it a good ID. Obviously, I can go in and update additional parameters, but for simplicity's sake, I just kind of created this. Once you're done, you save it, and it's important to click Publish, and then we go back to the App Designer. If we expand the entity view, you can see each of the different forms that we added. By default, it will always put them to all. And when you validate, if you haven't selected a specific form or view, you will get a warning message. So you can see here, if I go back to the forms, to get rid of this warning message, right, you can choose which form you want, but you clear the all checkbox, and then in the main form, you would just mark the specific form that you want. Again, remembering to save and publish your changes, and then you can start testing it. So you can see there's that vendor certifications form that I created. If you click on it, and what you're seeing here is a view. If you click on the details, that would take you into the detail form. So that's the basics of creating a model-driven app. There's obviously a lot of additional functionality and things that you can do, but with just what I've shown you, you can get started pretty quickly in, probably less than an hour creating your first model-driven app. So what I'm going to do now is kind of switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to show you more of 2 end-to-end demos. So in this first one, again, I am using, what I did was I installed the Manufacturing Industry Accelerator Model-Driven app. It's available out in App Source. There are additional resources if you want to get started with that available in GitHub as well. We talked about it, and I provided links to that in one of the previous ones, but I can post them in the chat as well. What I did was I extended this out-of-the-box model-driven app to add in functionality for vendor bank accounts. So I created a new entity in the Common Data Service, and then related to that entity, I make new views and forms, and then I go into Finance and Operations and I hook up the dual write. For demonstration purposes, I don't show the entire dual write portion of this. I kind of start it and just map the first 2 fields, but I don't finish it because we don't have enough time for today. But the steps that I basically run through are kind of listed here on the right-hand side. So I start by making the entity, adding fields, I make views, I make forms, I make my sitemap, I test the model-driven app, then I go back into Finance and Operations and set up and configure my entity map for the dual write. And then that's when you would run and enable it. And that's the portion I don't actually show in my demo. So with that, I'm going to switch over. So it does go pretty fast, and I'll just kind of talk through it. Many of these steps are kind of a repeat of what you saw, but it's more of an end-to-end demonstration here. I'm not filling in a lot of the fields just for time's sake in the demo, but I keep adding a number of fields. One of the things that you'll notice is that after I add this field, a bunch of additional fields automatically appeared. So much like when you create a new table inside of Finance and Operations, when you create a new entity in the Common Data Service, it will put standard fields in the entity for your created by, created date, modified by, and so on. And the functionality to populate all of those, it comes out of the box. So you don't need to know how to develop or do anything special. Now I create some views. So I took the standard view, and you can see it put 2 fields in there for me. And I just click on those fields to add them in the sequence I want them and publish that. Then I go and make a form. I choose the main form. It takes a second to load. And then I start adding in the fields that I want. So you can drag and drop them, or if you click where you want the field to be added, you can just click the fields and it will automatically add it below wherever your cursor is at in the form. So after I add those fields, I publish it and go back. And now I'm ready to go in and update my model-driven app. So I go into the solution, pick that supplier management app and open up the sitemap. You can see that there are already a variety of links in it, and I'm just adding a new one underneath responses for my vendor bank accounts. So I choose that entity, give it a nice name. That's the link that you'll click on the left-hand navigation bar, and a nice ID. Save those changes, publish the changes. We go back to the app designer, and if we scroll down, you'll see my new entity where it says all. I do clear that checkbox, and since I only have one main form, it's already selected, so I'm good to go. And then we can test it. So when I click play, it'll open my model-driven app. And there you can see on the left navigation pane my vendor bank accounts. There's no data in it, so now I'm switched over to Finance and Operations, and we go into Data Management, Dual Write, and then I'll need to add an entity map. So I'll choose the existing, there is an out-of-the-box entity for vendor bank accounts, and then I choose the new entity that I just created, and then I need to make sure I select a publisher, put in a version number, and type a description. Once you click save, it'll add that entity map, and you'll have to scroll down and find it in your list again and open it up. So there's my vendor bank accounts, and then you can start mapping. I only map the first 2 fields in this demonstration. You need to keep going and map all the fields. And then after you've mapped all your fields, you would click on that run button in the upper left-hand corner to actually start the synchronization. Again, if you want more information about the dual write side of things, I do encourage you to check out the TechTalk that is specific to dual write. So in the next example, I am going to show, it's still the Manufacturing Industry Accelerator model-driven app, but what I'm going to do is take data from finance and operations. And in my case, I wanted to surface my vendor invoices. You could do the same process with purchase orders or receipts or a number of other entities and add in similar pages. So I'm taking the vendor invoice header and the vendor invoice line entities and making them visible as virtual entities in my common data service. And then for each of the entities, I make new views, forms, and then I go and update my sitemap. And then when I'm done, I can test the app. You'll notice it's a little bit more simple. There's not as many steps to do here because once you enable the virtual entity, it's there and you're good to go. So I start in my model-driven app and I open up the advanced find so that I can go in and enable my virtual entities. So I go into available finance and operation entities and search for entities that contain the word invoice. In this demonstration, I already enabled the header, so you can see it's set to yes. And I'm just going to scroll down and we're going to do the vendor invoice line entity. So I click on that. I'll mark the visible checkbox and click Save and Close. I'll close down my windows and now I'm ready to start building my forms. Keep in mind in real life, there is a delay between when that entity will show up. You'll notice that here I only see my header entity right now, and that's because it hasn't, the caching and the syncing hasn't caught up yet. So I start with my vendor invoice header and I go to the views and I'm going to modify the view. When you enable those virtual entities, it just sticks the primary field in for you. And then I go select all the additional fields that I want. So I'm kind of going quick here. Obviously, the fields that you pick are up to you. I just go from top to bottom and alphabetically pick all the fields that I want. And then I start rearranging the fields and resizing the fields to my liking, and then I publish it. Now that I'm done with this, I'm going to go back. Oh, sorry, I need to make the form first. So the form, again, it'll just have 1 or 2 fields in it. It's that primary field again. So I add in all the additional fields that I want. I'm keeping mine very simple, but you can change the layout. You could make multiple groups. You can make multiple tabs. You can make multiple columns. That's all done in the components page, which you see here. So you can choose those different components. But one of the things I want to do is add a subgrid. And in order to add a subgrid for the vendor invoice lines, I need to first design what that vendor invoice line view is going to look like. So now you can see I go into my vendor invoice lines. I can see there's my primary field. It's actually called primary field. I add in some additional fields, find the ones that I want by marking them and adding them to the grid. I'll remove the fields that I don't want and sequence them the way I want so that it looks nice for the user when they use this page. So I remove the fields and then I start rearranging the columns to just using drag and drop functionality to get them in the sequence I want them in. And once I'm done dragging the fields all around, I will publish my view. And I do add sorting to this, so I sort by line number. Obviously, what you sort by, if you want to sort by multiple things, that's up to you. You can also create filters. And I also make a main form. So that main form is what allows me to create or edit records. I hide that field for the primary ID because I don't want users to see it. It's kind of a weird field. Add in all the fields. I can rearrange them and put them in the sequence I want by dragging and dropping again. Once I get the fields in the sequence that I like, I just publish this view. So you can see I'm dragging things around. I delete some fields that I decide I don't want. Click publish, and then I go back. And now I'm ready to go back to the vendor invoice header. And if we go into that main form, I'm going to go into components and choose a subgrid. And I just want the related records. It went a little fast there, but basically what happens is there's only one related record, which is invoice lines. So I give it a name. You can see it adds in that grid, and I give it a nice label for that header. So you can see it says invoice lines. Publish that, and so now my page has both the vendor invoice header and the lines, which kind of came from two different forms. Then I go back into my solution and pull up that app and go into the site map. In this case, I actually create a new group. I call it transactions. So this is where I could put my purchase orders and my invoices and so on. So after I add the group, I add my sub areas, choose the entity. So in my case, it's the vendor invoice header. And in my case, I don't actually put the vendor invoice lines directly on the page. The only way you can get to that is through the header. It wouldn't make sense to make a view of all those lines. I scroll down and I find it, and I uncheck the all checkbox and make sure it's just my one form, publish it, and then we can play it and see my new application. So if we scroll down, you can see there's my new group and vendor invoices. And there's the page that I developed. So in real life, this demo, when I recorded it, just so you know, it took about 25 minutes. I obviously cut out a lot of wait time and sped the video up quite a bit to make it fit into about 5 minutes. So pretty simple process to build or extend a model-driven app. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Murray, who is going to talk a little bit about how to take your apps and embed them into finance and operations.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So up until now, we've seen some of the integration with the model-driven apps through dual write and through the virtual entities, but we haven't seen how we can sort of integrate all of this into finance and supply chain natively so that we can take advantage of it. So there's a couple of things that we'll talk about in this session, and the first one is how we can turn on and off the charms and the navigation bar and the command bar to really make a sort of like a naked form that we are going to embed into Dynamics. And there's two qualifiers that you can add to the URL of the model-driven app, and that's the nav bar and the command bar parameters. Now, if you add nav bar off into the URL, then the navigation bar, which allows you to go all around the system, is turned off. So then that sort of gives you a very clean form. If you use the command bar equals false, then that also toggles on and off, or in this case off, the command bar that shows up inside of the model-driven app as well. So by using these qualifiers, we can go out and make a very clean model-driven app without all of the charms and the navigation bar associated with it. Also, something within a model-driven app, which is nice, is that we can actually go out and open up a specific record if we want to. So model-driven apps allow you to go out and, based off a GUID, you can go out and put the ID of the record in, which is the primary record for CDS. And then you can go directly to that record if you want. So there's a number of different ways that you can manipulate the information that that shows up. So now, if you're an X++ coder, then also you can embed you can use X++ and make some changes as well. So this is an example of I'm going out and getting rid of the nav bar. So I've got, in this case, I'm looking at an asset browser, and this is synchronized with the common data service through dual write. And I've turned off the nav bar, and if you notice here, it's now cleaned it up. If I wanted to, I could go out and turn off that the command bar at the top as well, which would make it an even cleaner view within the system. So these URL manipulations are really important. So this is a quick demo because all we need to do is just add that URL. So, but the next example is that now that we have the cleaned form, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to personalize the master page, and I'm going to add in a page. And what we can do is we can add in a website. And since we've got a URL to the model-driven app, then all we do is we create a tile, we go back and grab that whole URL there, paste it in, and save it. And then that's going to add a workspace tile for us. So I'm going to scroll down to my custom views I've got, and there's my customer assets. And now we have an asset viewer that's running inside of the model-driven app, presented here as almost a native view within finance and supply chain. So this is how we can go out, and if we have all of these additional forms, or maybe we have some customizations that we've done through model-driven apps, and we can go out and we can embed them natively into the workspaces. Now, as a side note, this is a great way that we could go out and incorporate existing functionality that's over in CDS, for example, some CE functionality, the omni-channel workbench, the customer service field service, the assets like we're doing here, and even other things like the new remote assist dashboard, and then make it one place that we can go out and access this information. Now, this is the first way that we talk about how we can go and personalize and add model-driven apps in. But another way is that we can go out and we can add model-driven apps directly into forms as tab controls. And when I go out and do this personalization, it's going to do exactly the same thing. And I'm going to go out and embed in the cases functionality directly here into my customer service screen within finance and supply chain. So if I scroll down, I've now got a tab directly here within the view that is going out and pulling up all of the case information, in this case from CDS and really from customer engagement, embedded directly into this form. So this is, again, is a great way that we can go out and manipulate the information and display it here. Now, if we remember back to a couple of screens back, if we want to go out and use X++, then we can further change this by going out and passing through the GUID or the primary key for this, so that in this case we could get just the cases for the customer that we're looking at, or some other information as well. So we can through a tweaking of the form in the back end, then we can do even more here within the view. So now I think we've got one more example to talk about, I think, Rachel. Yeah. So
I think first we wanted to talk about the personalization and administration. So when you do embed, and we talked a little bit about this when we did Canvas apps, but you'll need to share that personalization where you've embedded your Canvas app with other users. So this is the personalization screen that you'll find under system administrations. It's just a screenshot here, but there's multiple different tabs in this page where you can see the personal views is what I'm on right now. So these are all the views that I've created, but I would have the ability to select any one of those views and publish those views out to other users. I can also export it. If you have unpublished views that have been created, those will show up on the unpublished views tab. It has similar buttons, as well as that published views tab will show you the ones that have already been published. The settings and the users tab, so this is where you can control which users are allowed to personalize, and you can override those settings per user as well. When you need to manage your personalizations in between your environments, we would typically recommend that you would put your personalizations like this into your golden configuration environment. And when you do a gold database copy into prod, they would automatically move over. But if you need to move it from a test environment into your prod environment, you would do that by, you can mass select all of your views or just certain views that you want, and then export those using the export button from any of these tabs. And then you go into the new environment and use the import views button at the top and choose the organization views. We do generally recommend that you use organization views and try not to manage views on a user by user basis. It's easier to manage when you manage them at the organization level and the security roles. And then I think the last example here was the how to add it as a web app host control. So this is the X++ development way that you can add in a model-driven app. So you can go into a form and add a website host control, and we've got the same parameters available here. So you can see in this example, we're using the size to available. You put that URL in that you want. In this case, I think we just do Bing, but it could be obviously any URL that you want it to be. And then you can kind of control the appearance. I think, Jason, you had a recommendation yesterday on the type of form and the behavior of the form as well when you create this.
Right.
It's the height mode and width mode, right?
Right. If you want to do a full page app that suppresses kind of the form caption in the action pane, you should set your style to dashboard.
Thanks. So obviously you can put these into any type of form. If you build a new form, you can obviously make that be a menu item or a button on another form, just like any other X++ development. So that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can control and embed that functionality back into finance and operations. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some do's and don'ts. So some of these are similar to what we talked about with Canvas apps, but some things to keep in mind. So things to make sure that you do make sure that you define security for your application elements. You don't want to share your apps with everyone or just, give like a admin access to all of the users in your environment so that they can use your new features and functionality. Do make sure that you publish those personalizations and saved views with any users who will need access. So in addition to having access to the screens in finance and operations, users will need access to those screens in your model-driven app, whether they're customer engagement or your own native built on top of the CDS. So you need to give them security to both of those and share those personalizations. And we do recommend that you move personalizations between environments by importing and exporting those organization views. Some things not to do when you're using model-driven apps. Don't just use dual write for the sake of using dual write. Only use dual write to copy that data into the common data service if the data is actually needed for business logic in your model-driven app or customer engagement. The better alternative would be to use a virtual entity and allow that business logic to live inside of finance and operations. It also doesn't copy the data. So when you're using dual write, keep in mind that we are duplicating that data in between the two databases. And that will make both your finance and operations and your common data service database grow. And you'll need to make sure that you have appropriate capacity licensed for both sides. Make sure that you're not using unmanaged solutions. We do always recommend that you use managed solutions and don't use no solution at all. It's really important that you have a good application lifecycle management story for your model-driven apps and that you kind of figure out any sort of build automation that you want and kind of what that ALM looks like in combination with your finance and operations. And we don't recommend that you share personalizations on a person-by-person basis. Obviously, if you've got some exceptions to handle, that is an option, but it's not a great way to all-up manage your personalizations and saved views. So with that, we're going to switch gears to our checklist, and then we'll wrap it up with our Q&A. So a couple of things to make sure that you're doing. We've got a couple of resources. If you're just getting started with model-driven apps and you're not familiar, do start out by watching these 3 tech talks that I've provided links for here. The first one is the Application Lifecycle Management Tech Talk that focuses in on how to manage the ALM with any of your Power Platform components. For model-driven apps, there's a 2-part series for solution development with model-driven apps. That part 1 focuses on customizations. That is your low code, no code solution, and that covers a lot of the basics, and some of those you saw today. And part 2 goes into the extensions aspect, which is more of the deep dive on the technical aspects and developer type things you can do. Do make sure that you procure the correct licenses. So if you are using customer engagement applications and embedding them into F&O, it is not a way to circumvent licenses. You do have to make sure that users are licensed for that customer engagement application that you're embedding into finance and operations, as well as being licensed for F&O. Make sure that you create your solution, and then you can start building your Power Apps, testing your apps, and make sure that, when you're testing and you define that test strategy, you want to follow a lot of the same principles on your testing strategy that you would use for your finance and operations apps. Make sure that you configure the security for your users inside of your Power App. And then if you are going to be embedding it, then the next step in the process would be go ahead and embed it and share those personalizations and save views, and make sure to define a cutover strategy for your Power Apps as well. The last 2 slides are just a variety of resources that we have available out on the Docs website, the Learn site, and some videos that are available on YouTube. So there's an entire YouTube channel with more than 150 videos that you can go check out and learn to your heart's content about how to build model-driven apps. We also have a variety of resources that are specific to the Power Platform administration process. So I encourage you to check these out and make sure that you have a good ALM story for any of your Power Platform components. So with that, we're going to open it up for Q&A. I do see we've got a number of questions in the panel. So the first one that we have here, it says, for the new product app, is the idea to create in customer engagement and use dual write to have the item created in FinOps? Great question. The example that I did show was from customer engagement. Just keep in mind that if you are using customer engagement, you do need to be licensed for customer engagement. There are standard entities in the Common Data Service, and you don't have to have customer engagement. You could build something in the Common Data Service directly without customer engagement licenses as well. So it depends on what your needs are. If customer engagement has a lot of the functionality that you need, it's definitely a great starting point. So there was another question that came in, how to protect customization when sending to customer or partner. The key to that is using managed solutions. There are also some properties on elements to indicate if you want to allow customization. So you'll want to make sure that you use managed solutions, and if you don't want to allow customizations on certain elements, then you'll want to kind of choose those properties. I would encourage you to definitely check out that Application Lifecycle Management Tech Talk, which deep dives into more information about the ALM and how you would go about doing that. Okay, so we had another question that came in. What Power Apps or other license is required to use model-driven app using finance and supply chain management data only? If you are a finance and supply chain team member activity or operations licensed user, either running embedded in F&O or standalone. It depends a little bit. There have been changes. I would definitely encourage you to talk to your licensing reseller or your SSP to get the exact details. and there's multiple ways that Power Apps can be licensed. There are per user plans and there are per app plans. If you're on the older finance and operations licensing, you may have some Power Apps licensing that's already included with your finance and operations licenses. Also, if you have Office 365, depending on your Office 365 licensing, you may have some Power Apps licensing included there. So it's kind of a complex question. I don't have a quick, easy answer for you. There's a lot of variables that play into that. I do encourage you to check out the licensing guide and reach out to your licensing reseller or your Microsoft SSP. The next question, would you build an app to just display data from D365 F&O for the users to browse specific data? That's a great question. It definitely could be, a scenario. Although I think you'd want to think about your users and keep in mind that they would need to be licensed for both F&O and your model-driven app. So it may not be the most cost-effective way. If it's just view data, then a team member license on F&O would be sufficient for them, but you'd still need to have appropriate F&O licensing. So I think it depends on what your specific scenario is, but absolutely. One thing that you might consider too is just making more simplified versions of forms. A lot of times the F&O forms can be very busy and have a lot of tabs and buttons on them. And for your specific business scenario, you may want to kind of simplify it and just give them a handful of fields. So that's a great example of where you might use a Power App. So someone asked the question, how is the app available for the user, for example, on an iPhone or iOS? Great question. There are two ways that you can use a model-driven app on a mobile device. There is an actually purpose-built Dynamics 365 mobile app that you can download and install, and that app, and you might have noticed when I was creating views and forms, there was a bunch of properties on the right hand side to say display on phone, display on device, and so on. So there's a bunch of settings that you can use to control and kind of change the behavior of how a form will look on a phone or tablet device. You can also just open any supported browser, like if you're using an iPhone, Safari, if you're using an Android, Google Chrome, and so on, and just browse to the URL like normal. You won't get the resizing isn't as nice in those scenarios, but there's kind of two options. Generally, the actual purpose-built app is a little bit better, and you have more control in your model-driven app to change the behavior of what it would look like on a phone or tablet if you use that purpose-built app. Okay. So someone had a question, any tips to maintain high performance when querying virtual entities? That's a great question. So querying virtual entities is technically kind of behind the scenes, still an OData call. So the same basic principles that we apply and we explain for OData would apply to querying your virtual entities. So using filters in your OData, filters in your OData query is one way to kind of help with that. But at the end of the day, it's still kind of OData behind the scenes. So if you're trying to do really high volume, high frequency, virtual entities may not be the right choice for your particular solution. So I think that captures the all of the questions that we had. I don't think, Jason or Murray, did I miss any?
I don't think so.
Okay. There was one other, and it was answered in the Q&A panel. Someone had asked if there was a way to view your finance and operations screens in a model-driven app, so basically the opposite of what we showed today. And that is not available yet, but it is in our backlog and something that we're looking to do in the future. So with that, I am going to hand it back over to Laura to wrap us up and talk about our survey. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate that. I have posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We'd like your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible, and we thank you for your participation in that. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Rachel and Murray, and thank you, audience, for joining us today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.